Start recording. Okay, we're live. Actually, let me check. I'm gonna post the announcements. Oh, I got enough space on Drive. Okay. Gonna post an announcement.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, beautiful people.
This. And post the blue sky. Oh, I didn't prepare blue sky post on Madame.
Egad.
Oh no, I messed up.
What
I'm gonna just do a
heck?
quick one. Come ask anything about Resonite. Resonite, HTTP Twitch TV / Resonite. And that looks correct. Just typing this on the virtual keyboard. Sorry for that. I should have prepared the post and I forgot. There we go. Okay, posted. Hello everyone. I'm a little bit lunch today because I ate way too much potato salad and I'm
Froox is made of potato salad now.
I'm made of potato salad now. It was too delicious and I ate too much. And now I'm tired.
Don't squeeze him, it'll come out of his ears.
No. Hello everyone. Hello Marty Sage, hello Butler, hello Karen VR. Welcome to the Resonance. I'm just also switching to the channel for the questions. There we go. So it should be live. And people should be piling in. Hello everyone.
Welcome to your first
Hello,
live Resonance, Karen.
Yay, we got a thing. Thank you, Nuki. Oh my god, thank you, Nuki-kun, for the raid.
Yeah, thank you.
Yay, hello. So hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Resonance, which is sort of like an office hour / podcast where you can ask anything about the Resonite. Whatever you kind of want to ask, whether it's like to do with development, like, technical side, community side, the philosophy of it, like whatever we'd like to ask, feel free. Some of the topics we might like redirect you to some other ones, like the moderation office hours that happened like an hour and a half before this one, or the art team, or Purple Primes. So, but you're always free to ask, like, worst case scenario will just be like, okay, we recommend asking in this one instead. If you do ask a question, make sure you put a question mark at the end of it. That way it's gonna pop out on our thing over here. Like, well, this one's not a question, but it's gonna pop out like this. This is the raid. It also pops there. Yeah, it should be. I'm also here. Oh, I'm here with Syra from our engineering team as well. Who's gonna be helping me answer some of the questions. And we should be able to get started. So, before we start, let's see. We already got some questions popping, but we're actually gonna go to the questions from Discord first. There's we do have a post where people are able to ask questions in advance. So the first question we have, actually, Sarah would be able to bring it in as well, so we can kind of show it on the thing.
Yes. Let me grab the question from the thread real quick.
So the first question is from Mentshock. Will Resonite become the metaverse? By Wikipedia's definition, it already is a metaverse. The metaverse is a loosely defined term referring to virtual worlds in which users, represented by avatars, interact, usually in 3D, focus on social and economic connection. But I'm thinking more in line with the Ready Player One's metaverse, so widely adopted and all-encompassing platform that shapes the lives of millions. I haven't watched the movie or read the books, but that's what I gather from others. So, I mean, if you go by the Wikipedia's definition, then you already kind of, answered your own question. It technically already is a metaverse by that, definition, but it kind of depends. If it's more, about like being used by millions and shipping life was millions, like, we hope we do get there, that we make, like, platform that's really powerful and it's very versatile, so pretty much anybody can, use it for, like, their daily lives, whether it's for socialization, work, education, like, learning things, building things, using it as your virtual, like, workshop, your virtual studio. We want Resonite to be, like, very versatile and usable pretty much in every aspect of your life. Whether we get there, that is a question. We're gonna do our best so we do get there, but, we can't, predict the future, so we do hope, like, we get to that point, but, I'm gonna adjust this a little bit so you can also see it better. Where's the camera? I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller, there we go. So yeah, it's we do hope we get there. Time will tell, it's one of those kinds of things. I do think there's, like, a few things that would definitely help it. Like, one that's actually getting to its final phases is the performance update, which is gonna let us switch to modern .NET 9 framework. That would, like, kind of free up, like, make Resonite much easier to use to people because it's gonna run better on different machines. So that should, like, help broaden its appeal. There's other things, like improving the UI. Like, one of the things, like having a workshop and then having a license system, which will allow people, like, to more easily share what you create, and, even sell them, which would, like, go into the commerce aspect of Metaverse. So there's definitely things that will kind of help, like, on the road there. But yeah, like, short answer is, like, we hope we'll get there. We'll hope, like, to get to that kind of impact. We'll do our best. We can't see the future, so can't really give you, like, a definitive answer, but we'll do our best to make it a reality.
Just queuing some of these up. They're in top-down order if you want to grab them.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Marty SH. How are particle systems synchronized across clients? Does every client just run the particle system for themselves? Yeah, pretty much. So, like, the actual behavior of individual particles is not synchronized because in most cases there will be, like, way too much data. It's like, it's one of those kind of systems where typically the inputs to the particle system are, synchronized. Meaning, like, the properties of the particles, how they're supposed to look, the emissions, that's part of the data model, so, like, that should be same for every user. So generally, people will see very similar things. If you push it to the, like, to the extreme and say, like, you emit a particle and the particle can have, like, a random direction, and you only have, like, one or few particles, one user might see, like, a particle going one direction, the other will see it doing other. That's where it will kind of show that, like, the individual particles are not synchronized. But if we have, like, spray of particles, like, say I do this actually looks a little bit different on Cyrus end. Like, he sees the bubbles in different spots, but generally, like, it doesn't matter in most cases. And when it does matter, particle system might not be the best choice. But if it's like a visual effect, like, it doesn't matter where each individual particle kind of is. So, it's that kind of, like, system. Like, usually use it for things like where that is not an issue. It essentially produces, like, similar result on everybody's end. The next one is, let's queue all of these up. The next question is from BD. How much of performance impact is IK calculation on .NET 9, and with upcoming IK changes, is there any thought of transmitting computed bone poses instead of running IK on all the clients? So with .NET 9, I don't actually have, like, the data on hand, because I don't have, like, specific profiling data with .NET 9 specifically. I did profile the IK, like, several times in the past. It does have, like, some impact. It's not as slow as, like, some people think. Like, that generally can do IK relatively fast. However, there is, like, one aspect of it, and I'm actually gonna grab a brush. There is, like, one aspect of it that's not actually the IK itself that's causing a slowdown, and it's sort of the interactions with the data model. Because when the IK works, what it has to do, it has to like read out like, data from the data model and has to write it back. And one of the issues, let me just grab my brush. One of the issues is like, like if you go into a profile, you will see like, for example, IK is being executed. And this is, IK. I cannot write it backwards, so I'm just gonna do this. I'm also gonna move it like this. So you have like your IK, and then like the IK does like a whole bunch of stuff. It does like lots of different operations, and some of these are like writing to the data model. So you have like, you have the data model. I'm just gonna write data and put it here. So you have the data model, and it's, sort of interacting with that in some of the phases, and it's one of the things that actually kind of slows it down. It's one of the things we also do want to optimize. We kind of want to like make the data model more efficient for recurrent operations, like things that just run every single frame. Because right now the data model, it tracks when things change. And the tracking, like especially when there's a lot of interactions in every frame, that adds up. And it like when you look at the profile or with like a flame graph, it'll look like, the IK kind of balance up, but it's actually like accumulating lots of these kind of interactions with the data model. And this kind of makes the IK kind of look bigger than it is. Optimizing this, like, it would kind of like reduce a lot of that overhead. So that would also help. But just to switch to net 9, it makes those interactions faster, way faster. It makes the math calculations faster. So that kind of helps a lot, just on its own with the existing code, but there's still like, room for improvement. Right now we don't really have like any plans to do it like networked, because I don't believe it is necessary, because there's like a lot of other things that can be done as well, like one of them being, variable rate updates, which is another like, performance optimizations we want to make in the future, where some systems will update at slower rate than others. So say for example, I have my own IK, I'm kind of like moving and so on. I want it to be match my frame rate. So that needs to update every single frame. And if somebody like is near me, maybe that also needs to update, like I want it to be smooth. But say there's a person, who's over distance and over there, or maybe like in the over there, I don't need to see them at the same fidelity because I can, barely see them. Maybe I don't see them at all. So the system will be able to like lower the rate at which their IK updates, proportionally, to how far away they are, or like, how you cannot see them, and it'll help, reduce the load. The other things we want to do with the data model, we'll be able to execute the IK in parallel, using like multi-threading for it, which is going to help even more, because right now the interactions with the data model, they need to be synchronized, which makes it so you can really run it super well, multi-threaded. There is actually a system that like end up like being multi-threaded, which is the dynamic bones. All of the simulation of the dynamic bones, all the heavy math heavy stuff, is multi-threaded. However, what is really funny is like you can actually even look at it yourself. If I go to the debug dialog and I look at the focused world, there's like a bunch of statistics. Actually, no, it's under physics. The dynamic bones, there's total update time for me. It's like half a millisecond. The simulation is hovering around 0.20 milliseconds, and then the finish is around 0.20 milliseconds. The finish part is literally just taking all the computed values and copying them back to the data model. That's taking the same amount of time as all the math heavy simulation, which kind of shows you, how much overhead that has. Which means, that's something, that like the multi-threading, it helps because it takes like less compute time, but it's still like, that finish part where it has to write the results back, that's what ends up like, kind of slowing it down, instead of like needs, some of the data model kind of changes. But just by switching to the net 9, that code runs way faster, like it's able to generate much better machine code, so that just, bumps it into performance. But there's a lot of like things that we can still do to help improve the performance and make it so you can just compute the IK like locally. Because if you do start transferring over network, you increase, how much bandwidth is necessary. You also introduce, some effects, like, where maybe, like, it needs to be smoothed, and, like, you don't get, like, much of a precision in the movement, which are kind of downsides, so we would like to avoid those if possible. And I do believe they are possible because, like, with the right systems at hand, like, your machine should be able to run IK for, like, hundreds or thousands of, like, users. Like, there's, like, if it's, like, optimized really well. There's a lot of games that, like, that do this kind of thing. So the combination of, like, better, like, faster runtime, and then, like, in the data model improvements and the multi-threading for the actual computations, I think that'll make it so we don't need to do it networked. Next questions. Also, one more thing I'm gonna mention is, like, if any of this is also kind of subject to change. So, like, if, like, it seems like even with all of that, it would be beneficial to network it, we would eventually decide to do that. But unless we have, like, a solid reason to do that, like, and we exhaust the other possible approaches, like, I don't think we'll go for it kind of thing. Next question is from Mintshock. Just position it. There we go. So Mintshock is asking, at what point would you consider working on Linux client again? After the splitting, after 1.0, or much later? So right now we don't really have any specific kind of time, like any specific kind of milestone. I know at the very least it wouldn't be before the splitting. I don't know if, like, before, after 1.0, it might be after as well. After we do, like, a whole bunch of other things, because the core of the issue is, we don't have the bandwidth to it. Like, we don't have, like, the time to kind of deal with all of the kind of specific issues. And, like, we're essentially looking, at all the things, on our plate. And there's, like, stuff like, like UI improvements. There's stuff like, the performance that we're working with right now. There's stuff like, physics. There's stuff like the IK. And you essentially have to decide, okay, so which one are we going to invest time into? Because we only, like, you essentially end up in a situation where you can pick one or the other. Because your time is, our time is limited, so we have to decide which one we invest time in. So it becomes a question, is the native Linux client more important than, for example, rigid body physics? Is the native Linux client more important than UI improvements? Is the native Linux client more important, than having the workshop system? So it kind of becomes, like, that kind of a question is, like, when does it become more important than all the other things, like, we need to deal with? So I would say at the point, like, if there's a, situation where we are, like, we have enough bandwidth for it, because the other aspect of this, as we kind of grow the team, we'll be able to have, like, people dedicated to specific, more kind of maintaining specific kind of areas. So having an engineer whose responsibility can be maintaining the Linux one, that could also solve the problem. But for that, we need to grow. And in order to grow, we need to improve a lot of things. One of those being, the performance that's being worked on right now. Another being the UI, is adding kind of more features. And there's also a question, if we offer native Linux client, does that help us grow or not? Because if it doesn't help us grow enough and, get enough funding to afford more, like, engineers, we're probably not going to prioritize it. And it sucks, that that's the kind of reality of things, but we do have to be very careful about, like, like, where we spend our time. Because, like, we need to make sure, we can kind of keep going, we can keep paying, people on the team, and we can keep growing the team to kind of tackle more of the problems. And we want all the engineers to tackle problems that are most likely to let us, grow more, bring more people on the platform, get more support, get more funding. So at some point we might, grow to the point, like, where we're like, okay, like, we can focus on this again, there's, like, good reasons for it. We can afford it, like we're big enough, but I don't know when it's gonna happen. But we're probably gonna focus on, like, some bigger, like, bigger priorities before that happens. So the next question is from Triple Helix, which has actually 3 X's too in the name. Triple X's. Triple Helix is asking, with the new audio system, an upcoming performance boost after a splitting, could we potentially see audio ray tracing in the future? Of course, I don't know the technical challenge behind it, but the system this guy came up with seems really cool with a lot of practical use. And include a YouTube video. We're not gonna watch the video now, but I've seen this one before. Well, at least bits of it. What I can tell you is we are using the Steam Audio for audio spatialization. What Steam Audio does, it actually has support for ray tracing, where it sort of like, does a bunch of rays and figures out how the audio is like, bouncing around, how it's reflecting, and how it's being occluded by the word geometry. So Steam Audio already has that functionality. What we want to do is integrate it, where we essentially, we take, there's like, from what I've looked at the API, there's essentially 2 ways to kind of do it. One of the ways is like, we can take, the geometry that's in the world that you want the audio to interact with and pass it to Steam Audio. Steam Audio does its own like accelerations. The other one is we expose to it sort of like a ray trace function. So we could like, use existing ray tracing that Beppu Physics has. So we actually handle ray tracing, and it then like, uses to compute all the properties. So there's like 2 ways to kind of implement it, but we do need to integrate it somehow, and it will take some time. And part of me kind of wants to do it now because I'm like, I want cool, audio like that kind of reacts to the environment, but it also mean, delaying the splitting because like, like I would have to kind of spend time on it. So I don't know if I'll prioritize it now, because I feel like it kind of we need the splitting more, we need a big performance update. But after that happens, like I would really love to like integrate it, like give us like more realistic audio. I don't think it's gonna take even that much of a time, like it might maybe take a week, maybe 2. And I think it's gonna be really cool just for like the audio realism. We probably wouldn't implement our own system, especially since Steam Audio is already like a robust solution that handles it. So you'll definitely see it at some point in the future. Next question is from Ozzy. We have a lot of Discord questions today. There we go. Ozzy's asking, got some random questions I was wondering about before going to sleep here. Is it planned to be able to create local slots components ourselves? At some point, yes. We would like to like provide kind of tooling for it. Because there's like a lot of kind of use cases, like being able to have like systems that like, exist, for example, only on the server. So you can have like, say like you're building a game and you want like, a game controller that's like, orchestrating everything, interacting with things, but you don't want players to cheat. For example, like, being able to read some privileged state of the game that they could use for cheating in that game, or, even mess with it, like, so there's like lots of kind of like use cases. I'll provide some kind of tooling for it, don't know when, but it'll happen sooner or later. Next question is, I believe photon dust collision events node was turned down on GitHub, but is there planned Protoflux nodes for programmatically interact with photon dust? We don't really have like super specific, because like most of the way you interact with photon dust is through the data model, and a lot of the way how Resonite works is you interact with things through the data model, which means like a lot of the cases you don't really need 2 specific things. And because like the way like it works, and we kind of talked about it like with the earlier question, is like everybody has their own local simulation. So we have a node that, for example, adds a bunch of particles somewhere. That node, like, would only do it for the user who runs it, which would link to desync unless you manually handle synchronization. And one of the core principles of Resonite is avoiding, so you have to manually handle synchronization. That's like one of the things that like we will almost never break. Like every systems that we want to design should work with implicit synchronization by default, and if you do want to override something to happen only locally, that is an override. Like it essentially is an exception, not the default. With node like that, the things being local would be the default, which, like, breaks our kind of philosophy. So that's one of the reasons probably don't do that. And one of the ways we achieve, that everything's kind of synchronized is by modeling it in the data model, because the data model is implicitly synchronized. There might be some helper functions like that we add, like for example, like, for particle bursts and so on, but generally a lot of the stuff, like, we wanted to use, like, the general things that are already in the data model, is just manipulating the values there. And the last question from Ozzy is, and totally unrelated, asking this question at 9 a.m. Do you have words of advice for fixing sleep schedule? I'm the wrong person to ask for that one. I have the sleep schedule of a US person with a bad sleep schedule in Europe. So it's not a good person to ask. Next question is from BD. What software would you recommend for someone who wants to play with creating Gaussian spots for the first time? So the one I use is called Jawset Postshot. It's currently in beta, which makes it's free. You can play with it, but it will eventually become paid software. I don't know how much the price will be, but if you want to mess with it, like, now is a good time. And there's also, like, some other alternatives. Like, I know, like, Sarah, we've been kind of looking into some as well. I'm not too familiar with those because I've been using Postshot myself.
Yeah, there are like a couple solutions for. Well, actually, there's one main solution that I know of. There's probably more, but there's another solution for Linux called OpenSplat. It's a little bit more of like a manual process. You run it in like a Docker container or something, and I believe you have to use some other separate software to do like the initial like sparse
Alignment.
the alignment and like the sparse like point cloud like generation, and then you feed that data into like the OpenSplat program, and then it will start splatting it.
Yeah, it's kind of more like DI kind of solution, but it's free. Like, and I think that one will remain free.
Yeah.
The Jawset Postshot has the benefit, like, it's very integrated. You pretty much just drag and drop your photos. If you have good quality photos, you can even leave everything at default, and it's gonna give you like a good splat. So it kind of depends, what do you want to play with. And the last question is from Modern. It's a big one. Yeah, there we go. Modern is asking, so my question is about dynamic bone squish compression GitHub issue. If you look at it and see my example on it, I've been meaning to give this couple resonances now, but I disk, for example. So let me have a look. For example, so there's like a video. And it's just a video, like, I don't know if I can bring it here, but it's just ramming. Okay, interesting. I'd have to figure out how to model that with it. Like, it's kind of like pushing it. Like, I think that would be like doable. Like, yeah, I think this can be implemented. Yeah, I don't think like that would be like much of an issue. We just kind of figure out a good way to kind of fit it with the system. So I think that could be implemented. We just need some time to think about it. So with that, that's actually all of our Discord questions, which means we can finally get to the Twitch questions, and there's a lot. So let's get started. So the first one is from Fur. Fur is asking, Froox, are you ever jealous that Sire has pointer ears than you? Well, I think he meant to say pointier, but he said pointer, and we'll say, like, we don't use pointers here, we use references.
We don't do that here.
We don't do that here. Only sometimes, only in unsafe blocks. But even
Yes.
then.
Only when we enable the allow unsafe blocks flag in the CS proj file.
Yes. Which now we don't need to, because in most cases because of spans. It's beautiful.
Yes, spans in the unsafe class. It's great.
See, you ask a silly question, get a silly answer. Next question is from Garen VR. Is asking, I've been wondering, who is the silent QT in the background whose whole purpose seemed to be passing perhaps forward and doing goofy notes? It's Syro, and it's not silent.
Meow. I I am
Actually,
Cyro. I am.
oh, okay. I got paranoid that like the your volume was gone, but like it seems like
Okay.
yeah.
Am I good?
If
Hello?
you don't hear Cyro, let me know. But like it looks like you should be able to hear him.
Oh, I think they're talking about like just because I've been quiet. Hello,
Yeah.
I am Cyro. I'm just a little guy. I'm one of the engineering
Okay.
people. Hi.
Yeah, Grenadier is saying we do hear him. There we go.
Okay.
So the next question's from Marty SH. Um, is there a way to make objects have a trail? Something like particle trail module, but for individual objects. I mean, I've used the trails like the particle trails. Like that's a pretty good way to do it. You could like build your own system, like we kind of position things and so on. But like, I feel that's just more effort, and you can just use the particle system for that. Like, that's usually how people do it. Next question is from Cobalt site. If the EU laws changed for the minimum available rating for platforms like Resonite to 13 plus, would Resonite be forced to change to do the rating? So I don't think we would be forced to do that.
Aren't we 16 plus anyways?
Yeah, we're 16 parallel. So like, if the one of the reasons we are 16 plus is because like if you go under 16, the laws for like processing and storing data of users who are below 16 is much stricter. And right now, like we're too small, like to like be able to deal like with like the legality of that, like and sorting those things out. So because like the laws are a lot more complicated, like it's just simpler for us to be like 16 plus. We don't allow anybody under 16. That way, like we're clear with the laws. We make sure like we're not really breaking anything. If they change those laws, so like those things were no longer necessary, which I don't really think is gonna happen. But if they did, theoretically, like we could still be like say like we just allow 16 plus because that is our policy. Like they will not force us to allow users younger than that, unless they made law specifically for that, saying like you're not allowed to do that. But again, like I don't see this happening, and I don't see that happening. But more realistically, if they did change the law, like so, like we didn't need to do some specific stuff, we might like just lower it to 13. So, but it's very like I think it's like a hypothetical that like is not gonna happen. So more realistic, what's gonna happen is like once we kind of grow big enough, we'll have the resources, to actually be able to handle the complexities of like data of like users under 16, and at that point we would allow them to the platform. But we're not at that point yet. Next question from Navy 3001. They're asking. Let me also just so I can type my question from last week when corrected. What do you think of the idea of you click a word orb and it shows a list of active sessions for that word and also a button to create a session? I mean, that could be interesting. Like, we do want to like rework the whole like word UI as well and kind of like improve the mechanisms. I would suggest like GitHub issue for dev so we can kind of consider it. Like it's possible. I don't know if it's gonna like align with what we want to do, but something we can definitely consider. Nitra is asking, will spatialized reverb zones be possible with audio? Yes, they will be. Sarah, you actually did like a test, because Sarah, you were implementing the Zeta reverb, and it works pretty okay. I think like you were doing something like half and half mix or something.
Yeah, so I was like, I tested the Zeta Reverb, like I downloaded like the actual like Zeta Reverb effect because it's the same thing, and like I put it in my like audio mixer just to like see how it sounded. And with like a 50-50 like mix of like wet and dry, that's like sound that's affected by reverb versus sound that's not affected by reverb. Or actually no, wet and dry in terms of how much audio is spatialized and how much audio is not spatialized. So if you partially unspatialize the audio so that you can pump some of that into the reverb, it sounds really cool. because like you still get the spatialization. Like I can still tell where people are in the world from like the dry signal because it's still spatialized. But the like global sort of like in my ears like echo sounds like it's like coming from the room that I'm in. And that's also because zeta reverb is like a stereo reverb, so the reverb actually reverberates slightly differently in each ear, which makes it sound a lot more open and spatialized than it actually is.
Yeah. In short, like we will allow it like for you to like do that because now we kind of control the system, so you can mess around with it, like see for yourself like what works for your world. It's also like once we do integrate like the environmental thing, you might not even want to use that because the environmental probing, it actually does a more physically based reverb, so like that might end up like giving more realistic results, but we'll like we'll offer all the options. Next question is from Darkest Sabertooth. What do you call Fruit Loops made by Resonite? A Fruit Loop? Got him, Fruit Loop. we don't have any Fruit Loops. Fruit Loop sponsorship maybe. Next question is from BD underscore. I've noticed in Resonite, if you have multiple Gaussian splats, they don't Z-order properly. That is, one will always render over the other rather than doing so by spot basis. Is this something that could be resolved in the future that you just don't have the bandwidth for, or are there some significant technical issues here? So it could be resolved in the future. One of the potential issues is like it might cost too much performance to do, at least like with the current pipeline, but like once we do make some switches, that'll make some things easier. Essentially what happens is like, you have to sort the splats, and if you're like rendering, if you're rendering multiple splats, what you have to do on the GPU, you have to essentially collect and combine all of the splats and then sort the combined ones. Which means you have to essentially build out a new buffer of Gaussian splats on the fly for each frame that you render. Right now the buffer is fixed, because you have like each splat is like its own buffer, and you just sort that buffer, and like you don't have to worry about any other splats. So it is possible. It'll definitely take like quite a bit like to implement that because it'll have to change how the Gaussian splat rendering pipeline works, and I probably would not want to touch it like until wouldn't want to touch it until like we do make some switches for the rendering engine. It's also one of those things like like most of the times like you don't like the Gaussian splats will not really blend well anyways, because like they tend like the way they tend to work is they might not model the surface of it like super well, so like they might blend in a kind of weird ways. One thing we could do is add like a thing like that like bakes two Gaussian splats together, but like I don't know if that's really worth it. Next question is from Darkest Sabertooth. Will audio support 5.1 or 7.1 surround sound? Yes, I know not many VHRs support it. However, a lot of cheaper gaming headsets do. So from my checks, Steam Audio supports it. Right now, like I'm focusing sort of like on feature parity, so like it's written with stereo buffers. However, it can be expanded in the future. I don't think I would add the support for MVP because I feel they might add like too much kind of time, and I don't want to like delay things. I would suggest making a GitHub issue, asking for the support. We can gauge how much people really want to see this happen. Oops, sorry. How much people want to see this happen, and we'll decide based on that when to prioritize it, but probably not for MVP. Next question is from Platypus744. Regarding the Net9 switch, how do you expect it to be deployed? Will there be pre-release testing? Do you anticipate it leading a lot of bugs that put it testing for a long time? Yeah, there will definitely be pre-release testing. Like, it's a very, very big change. So, like, we do want to make sure, like, it's stable before it gets, like, released to main. I don't know how many bugs to expect. I don't think it will actually have that many bugs, with, like, functionality of the worlds, because that's not really going to be changing super much. What I expect more is like, stuff like like either stability bugs or bugs like where some of the state of the render maybe gets desynced or maybe like corrupted or or it crashes or something like that. So more bugs along that line, because it doesn't really touch the data model much. Like it's still like it's doing the same kind of things. It's just not being kind of sent over like shared memory in some pipe. Um, so we'll see how it goes. We usually kind of we deal with those things as they kind of go, but we've been also doing a lot of kind of preparatory work to make sure, like, taking step by step. Um, so like, like we don't have like a million things, like kind of million variables that we have to deal with, and it's hard to figure out what's happening, but we kind of test things like gradually. Next question is from Darkest Sabertooth. Dark is asking, a real question, will headless ever support supplying their own audio stream? For example, in your config, choose your audio input for streams like mic or some other source. There's a GitHub issue for it. Like you could if you want to stream audio, it is possible. Right now, if you wanted to do it, it's a little bit trickier because we are using the CS Core library to interact with with the audio devices. Problem with that, it's Windows only, which it's fine on it's fine like for the graphical client because that is Windows only, but like most people use Linux for the headless, which means it wouldn't work. There is a library that I just discovered like very recently that does have multi-platform support for audio devices. One issue, actually it wouldn't be that much of an issue for headless, but we're probably not gonna touch it until the splitting. The issue is that the library is like net 8 and plus, which means it does need the split. I would want to replace CS Core completely, just gonna eat it out, because it's kinda not really updated anymore. It's kinda deprecated, kinda like it's a lot of crust. So we don't have to switch to this library like globally, and at that point like it's gonna be very easy for headless to be just okay, I wanna stream this audio device in. So yeah, that'll become a thing at some point, but probably after splitting. Next question. Marty SH, UX question. Do certain UI colors mean certain things? For example, I noticed cyan is world public sociable and purple is invisible private. It is also one of the first things I assumed about Resonite's UI when I first joined. Yeah, so there's some logic to it. I don't actually know it from top of my head. This might be actually one of those things like to bring to the art team office hours, or specifically like Chroma, because Chroma is the one who designed the color scheme, and he made like a document, which actually I think it should also even be part of our press kit. He made like a document on like what do the different colors mean and when are they kind of like being used. So there is a sort of like some design language behind it, but I can't tell you the details.
Yeah, I mean, when we were initially building it, we did try and code like pinky purple colors to like local kind of like the idea of localization, like local values and stuff, and like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Next question is from Tikonan. Hey Froox, I got a question about Quest compatibility. Is it going to happen or too hard? So by that I assume you mean like running natively on the Quest. We would like it to happen at some point. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen for it. Two main things is like the performance improvements, which is something we're working on, because Quest, it uses mobile hardware and has a fraction of resources that your PC has, which makes it like a lot harder to kind of run. And there's also like limitations, for example with Unity engine, where the garbage collector it uses, it actually doesn't behave super well on the Quest with something of this type, where like you essentially get increasing memory fragmentation, and then eventually ends up crashing the application, even if it like manages its memory and it never allocates more than like available. Problem with fragmentation is that, like, it reduces how much continuous memory is available, and it just crashes. So there's like a bunch of kind of issues. The other thing we need for native support is there will need to be some content segregation, because your Quest, even with the best optimizations, it won't be able to like handle as much as a PC can, handle as much geometry, handle as much complexity. So the content will need to be sort of separated. So you only allow more optimized, more like low poly content, running on the mobile hardware. So it'll happen at some point. We're kind of working towards it slowly. And I hope we get there as soon as we can, but there's a number of things that will need to be sorted out. Next question is from Grand UK. Grand is asking, I was attempting to create a plugin for Resonite and needed to make protoflux bindings, which I eventually stumbled onto protoflux bindings generator added without support. However, it doesn't work for non-YDMS assemblies. I'm actually going to pull it up because it's hard to read. Assemblies, would it be possible to update it to work with non-YDMS assemblies for plugin development? Yes, I know it's provided as is with no support, but it doesn't work at all outside YDMS. Yes, it's already a GitHub issue, and I have given it a thumbs up. Yeah, if you're giving a thumbs up, we can kind of look at it. I don't know how much work that would be, so it's just a question of bandwidth. So this is pretty much just a prioritization question. We need somebody to look at it and fix up whatever needs to be fixed up. Next question's from VT Arxellus. How many flavors of ice cream does Froox enjoy? All the fruit ones. I really like the fruit ice creams, which are more like sorbets, but I still count them as ice cream. How about you, Sarah? What kind of ice cream?
I like... Ooh, what ice cream do I like? I tend to like mint chocolate chip. Cookie dough can be nice. Yeah, I mean, those are good. I mean, sometimes I just like plain old vanilla too.
Well, can we get the times two? There's one ice cream I had that was super good, which was kiwi flavored. It was delicious. Also frozen yogurt, which I guess could treat as ice cream. It was fruity, I think it was watermelon.
They're both dairy.
Yay. So next question is from DevHammer. I saw your dev blog and seems you have made a lot of progress on the audio system, at least on the surface. What still needs to be done before the audio system is in a good place? I actually have my notes, so I can just bring it out, because I usually test it and there's a bunch of stuff. So this might not be all of it. I'm just gonna screenshot it, so it's kind of easy to bring in. It might not be all of it. There might be more things I kind of discover along the way, but these are the main things I have kind of on my to-do list. So I don't know where to place it. There we go. So one of them is sending the actual audio updates. That's gonna send events. That's not happening right now. It's relatively easy to add. Any non-specialized audio needs to be global, because right now the fall-off and spatialization in audio, they are actually separate concepts. So even if audio is not spatialized, it will still become quieter as we get further from the source. So there's another thing, also relatively simpler. Need to add some filtering, clumping, some sanitization of the buffers, relatively easy. Then need to change the default device, because the previous system, it was built with the idea that the unit is handling the audio device by default, and we override the audio engine or audio output. Now Unity, essentially the builds that I've shown, the Unity audio system is completely disabled, it's just gone, and it means we're actually handling the interactions with the audio devices ourselves. And so that system kind of needs to be adjusted, so instead of it being an override, it actually just uses it by default, because right now, unless I override it in the test builds, there's just no audio, because it just thinks, okay, Unity is handling it, but there's no Unity handling it, so it's just quiet. Needs to handle some scaling, so needs to handle when you actually scale up and down. There needs to be few things some other properties, for usually you disable spatialization if you're really close to the source, so I need to add that. That's actually not even on the list. And Doppler, I need to implement the Doppler effect, which is one of the little bit weirder ones, so I think that one will take a little bit, so have a good system for it, also I have an idea. There's also like, just a bunch of testing, some optimizations, because right now it just allocates a lot of buffers and deallocates, so I need to add like pooling throughout the system. So yeah, there's a fair amount of stuff. Like a lot of it's like relatively quick and easy. So it's just kind of knocking it down in the list. I kind of hope I can knock down a bunch of things like tomorrow, but I'll see how it goes. Next question is from BD underscore. When making official tools, how do you decide how much to do in C# and how much to do in Protoflux? For example, the Gaussian tool has the logic to create and adjust bounding boxes in C#, which means you can make changes on how it's handled within the Resonite very easily. It's kind of depends like what is easier right now, like what's like the least amount of effort. Eventually our goal is like, so you can essentially have all the APIs and things that the tools do work with a very general system. And I can pretty much build all of the functionality within Protoflux and I can kind of adjust it. But right now for some things it would just take too much time, so it's like faster to just implement sort of the skeleton of it in C# and then like, make it neat like in Protoflux. That way I only need to worry about the core functionality of it. And then like, have like the art team like handle like, sort of some of the polish, adding like a lot of kind of cool things. That way, like for example, with the Gaussian split tool, one of the things it does, like, it has like a lot of dynamic behavior where it needs to get like, objects like, that are overlap, like if you draw something, it needs to figure out are there any Gaussian splits within this. It's using stuff like, physics queries, like which give it a collection. We don't have collection support, which means you can't really do it with Protoflux nicely. It's doing like, it's calling like async methods, like which you can kind of do, but like you cannot do it like dynamically on things. So we do need to implement more stuff in Protoflux for those things to be easier to implement. Once it kind of happens, I would like us to kind of transition more towards that, like where pretty much most of the tools are actually just built purely in Froox engine with Protoflux, eventually WebAssembly, and it just become content, and there's very little stuff on the C# side, or the C# side is mostly just general APIs and frameworks for it. But until that happens, like, it's gonna be a mix of both. Next question is from Shy Loki. Hello Froox, I'm so happy I found Resonite, really unique VR experience. I'm curious on the state of improving full body tracking. Is that on upgrade radar? Yay, and hello, I'm really enjoyed Resonite. Yes, it's something I definitely want, like, we definitely want to improve. Right now the main focus is on performance, which is kind of getting into its final stages. IK is relatively high on the list as well. There's a few other things like the UI and some other stuff, like Protoflux collections, for example. That's like something that a lot of like creators want. So I don't know for sure which one will end up prioritizing yet. They're usually kind of like handled it more kind of close, like when I'm actually done with the major task. But it is something I want to improve. Like I like to use like full body myself, and I want it to feel better. So it's definitely something that is gonna be improved at some point. I just I don't know if it's gonna be the next immediate priority or there's gonna be things in between. Let's just checking time. So yeah, it'll be improved, but I cannot tell you like any specific timeline right now. Never Seen is asking, I feel like I've missed something. What exactly is the splitting? So it's sort of it's sort of a joke name, like for the last phase of the big performance update. There's actually a dedicated video on our YouTube channel that I do recommend checking out. It's like on how the performance update is gonna work with the multi-process architecture. In short, there's like a few systems that are essentially sort of Actually, let me back up a little bit. In order to get like the big performance update, we need to take Froox engine, which is like running all of the logic, all of the kind of complexity, and pull it out of Unity, because Unity is using very inefficient kind of runtime that's making the code much slower than it can be. And we need to pull it out into its own process that runs under .NET 9. And essentially that is what the splitting is. We split Froox engine from Unity into its own thing, and it's just going to communicate to Unity, which is only going to be handling pretty much the rendering at that point. And that's, the splitting. In order for that split to be able to happen, we kind of need to unentangle Froox engine from Unity, so it can actually be pulled out. The two main systems that were that had more deeper entanglements was the particle system, which is now replaced with photon dust, and the audio system, which is being worked on right now. Once those systems are done, then essentially the sort of integration between Froox engine and Unity can be reworked, so it can communicate over a shared memory and some IPC mechanism, and we can pull Froox engine out, essentially split it out. So it is the splitting, and once that happens, that's when we get the major performance boost, because we'll be able to run Froox engine with much faster runtime. I do recommend watching the video on our YouTube channel. It has the graphs and everything. It's very visual. Dark Sabertooth. Should we get Froox a Ninja Creamy so you can make your own fruit-based ice cream sorbet? I don't know what Ninja Creamy is. Is it like a kit to make ice creams? I don't know what that one is. I mean, if it's fruit ice cream, I'm for it. But if it requires a lot of work, then probably no, because I'm not good with that stuff. Grandy K. Follow up the plugin by next question. The issue mentioned does say how someone patched it to work without other assemblies. If not, I will add it. Yeah, this can help. If you already identify the issue, we can look at it and be like, okay, this fix works, and we do that. So that might help. But we'll still have to kind of look at it and evaluate it. Next question's from Garen VR. Karen VR is asking, how do you and other devs feel about how far you and the project come in the past couple of years since rebranding as Resonite? So, technically we haven't actually rebranded. Resonite is a distinct project. But overall, with our work, with any past projects and this one, I feel we've kind of come pretty far. If you it's kind of hard to see progress, as you kind of making it. It feels kind of slowish because it takes a lot of time. But then if you look a year back, and you look 2 years back and 3 years back, where you were at the time, that's usually when you see much kind of bigger change. But it's kind of hard to do because it doesn't really go on old builds. But sometimes you can kind of catch little glimpses of it, when people are like, oh, this is improved. This used to be a thing. This is no longer a thing. But you always kind of end up wishing you could go faster anyways. So there's that. The next question's from BD_. I started after Resonite became Resonite. What's the difference between protoflags and logics thing I see on some other items? So they're pretty much different systems. There's general similarities because both are node-based systems, which is not not unique to Resonite or in any other applications. Node-based systems have existed for decades at this point. They're both programming languages. So, even with very distinct languages, gonna have similarities in how they kind of operate. But if you look at the details, there's a lot of oh my god, thank you. Oh my god, there's a lot of thank you BD_ for the gifts. If you kind of look at them, there's a number of distinct things. For example, protoflags. Technically it's a separate VM. It's its own sort of virtual machine that sort of takes all the code takes all the node code and sort of builds its own structures, which is something that Logix doesn't do. So protoflags builds its own acceleration structures. It's sort of a semi-compilation step. It's also stack based, so it has its own execution stack and so on. which is also very distinct in how it behaves. And because of that, it supports a lot of other features. Like, for example, you can call into nested node, which is not integrated yet, but it exists in Protoflask. You can have local variables, you can have stores, which is something that also the old system didn't support. There's like even like just the compilation step, it makes it actually faster because it doesn't need to be figuring out constantly on the fly, what it needs to be doing. It sort of like tries to figure out as much as it can ahead of time and then just, execute on it. So that kind of like, makes it behave much faster. It also is more efficient on how it kind of propagates changes. So like, it builds this acceleration structure where, it tracks if any inputs change on events or if they change continually, and based on that it classifies things into two different distinct update categories. If one's update continually, it essentially skips all of the tracking for changes and it's just going to update it every frame because it knows it's going to be changing every frame. But if it's only on changes, it like builds a list. Okay, if this input changes, then I know I need to update this part of code to like run and compute a new result. Versus like with the logic system, what that would do, it would every time change happens, it would essentially have to propagate through the entire setup of nodes, which takes a lot of like CPU time, so it would be actually very slow and would be happening every frame if the thing is changing every frame, and it would be kind of very inefficient. So Protoflask has like a lot of like it works very kind of differently, which gives you a lot of kind of benefits and like both like in terms of like its performance and also capabilities. It also supports async, so you can actually have like something that delays execution until next until for example next frame or something else happens. So I hope that kind of like clears that one. There's like a number of like other like kind of differences too, but like I feel those are like some of the major ones. Next question is from Tikonan. So another one about VR hardware. Are you planning to get big screen beyond 2? It seems kind of promising. Like so maybe. Like I do use the Vive Pro, which is a relatively old headset, but like there's not really like a headset that I would like more at this point. The big screen 2 seems like it could be, but I'm probably gonna wait like a little bit, like for some reviews and stuff like that, see like how people like it, and then maybe kind of consider like upgrading to it. What about you, Sarah? What do you think?
So initially I was going to pre-order one, but I think I'm gonna wait because Ryuvi said that they were gonna get one, so I might wait to see what Ryuvi has to say about it.
Yeah. I'm kind of on the same boat. Next question is from BD underscore. Do you have any plans on access control or licensing for assets in order allow paid assets to be used for worlds but not exported, transferred to avatars, etc.? Yes, we'd like to introduce like some sort of like asset licensing kind of system or license tracking system where you can say, for example, you say I made this asset, and then like you specify when people can obtain license and what can they do with a license. The system would then be able to sort of enforce those rules, make sure only people who actually have license to use it. And we could provide like methods for people to purchase the license, to use that asset, or maybe import like an external license if they purchased it, like say in Gumroad or something like that. So yeah, like we want to have a system, and it would like fit really well with Workshop, because there actually is a video on Workshop on our YouTube channel as well, which covers a bunch of this. But in short, in Workshop, you essentially be able to publish anything you make. And some of the items, they can have like a license in order to be able to use them, and it will essentially make the Workshop serve as a store where you can like sell your stuff. But the other cool thing is you'll be able to have sort of discover things, because people like to, go into worlds and they're like, they spawn stuff, and somebody spawns something cool and you're like, okay, I want to save that. And when you try to save it, it's gonna say, this is a paid asset, you need to purchase a license for it. So like, we have to decide, okay, do you want to buy it, so I can save it or no. And that way, like, you can also, buy things more organically as you kind of discover people playing with them in world. And I think that could be like, a really cool thing, if you're an asset creator, if you make stuff, you make something that people like to play with, and that's, how you can get a lot of sales on it. And thank you again for all the gifts, all the gifted tiers. Next question is from Grandi K. Unsure if I asked this before or not. Could it be possible to add a local API to headlesses to run server commands as you type them into command line normally? This could help people make system programs to manage headless software better. Yeah, this is something we covered a few times. Like, we essentially want to provide some kind of API so you can, interact with it, write your own scripts, write your own, like, dashes and frameworks and things to operate the headless. I think there's probably a GitHub issue for it. Like, I think there should be. So just checking in time. Next question is from Lucas07. Wait, why do we need PhotonDust audio for splitting? PhotonDust is great and I can't wait for improvements features of audio, but wouldn't it be possible to use IPC and continue using Unity's particles audio systems? I mean, I kind of covered this earlier, and I do strongly recommend watching that like video on our YouTube channel, because I kind of go into detail on like why it needs to happen. But in short, the problem is, like, if you imagine this is Froox engine and you imagine this is Unity, for IPC to work, like, or like to be like feasible, things need to be like, kind of done in sort of like bulk. So we can just send like a big bulk message, be like, please do this stuff. Problem with those systems is like, they're like, okay, this ties into this ties into that, this ties into this ties into that, this ties into this ties into this. They're very like entangled, and it makes it very hard to like, split this into another process, because now we have this kind of complex thing where, doing that over IPC would be a nightmare. And it would be a nightmare to handle stuff like, latency and synchronization, because if you want to switch to another process, that is a context switch, and context switches are expensive, and they add a lot of latencies. Because right now, like, something in Froox engine, it can literally call a method, do something here, then return here, do stuff here, call a method, do some here, and now imagine that every single one of these, you have to like switch from one process to another, then switch back so you can continue here. Like, it will essentially just become a nightmare. Like, if we really wanted to, you could technically probably do it, but it would probably run very slow, maybe even, especially with audio, maybe even so slow that, like, the audio would be clicking because it would be missing a lot of the, kind of calls. It would make the system, like, way more complicated, and it would make it take way more time to implement, and we wouldn't really, we wouldn't really, gain any of the other benefits, because, like, it would be so entangled that, like, we would have to rework it anyways to do some of the other, multi-process architecture stuff. Because one of them is, like, it provides better fault tolerance. Like, for example, this is Froox engine, this is Unity. Say, like, this crashes, we can keep this running, relatively easily, spin this up again, and just start sending it data again and be like, please render this stuff. When it's more entangled, it's like, it would be like way harder for this to not bring down this with it. And the other part is, like, one of the reasons for multi-process architecture is also security. So, like, once the processes are kind of sandboxed, if one of them is, like, compromised, for example, say the render would, like, end up being compromised somehow, it prevents what it can do. But if we have, like, very wide API surface, that makes it kind of hard to control, versus when it's, like, more, like, sort of encapsulated, that's much smaller surface, and it's much easier to reason about and make it secure. Plus, the other reason is also we do want to eventually take Unity, yeet it out, and put a new renderer system, which means, now we would have to rework those systems anyways. So we would spend so much time, making it work with those systems, just for it to be slower, more harder to manage, more buggy, more latency. Only to need to do it only to make our own systems anyways. So it's just not a very kind of good way to go about it, and the results would very likely take way longer than the current approach is taking for worse results. Next question is from Modern Balduni. Modern's asking, is there any plan on making the haptic colliders properly movable? When these are driven, it seems that disappear until they're done being driven, making moving haptics really weird. I don't actually know what you mean. That sounds like should probably be a GitHub bug report. Yeah, I don't really know what do you mean there, but it sounds like a bug.
Yeah.
Next question is from BD_. I heard a rumor that Protoflux driver, for example, output driving Froox engine value is evaluated every frame, even if unchanged. Is this true in the current implementation, or should I not worry too much about the number of drives I have as long as they don't change too often? So if it's unchanged, it kind of depends, where that value is sourced from. But a system, it actually has a mechanism where it sort of tracks. Actually, didn't we answer this question in the last one? I swear, I have a deja vu. But in short, with Protoflux, when you have inputs and you have a drive. So if you just plug this directly, if this input is not changing continually, it'll actually put it into list, where it's if, say this is A, if A changes, then update this drive. And if you have AB and you, for example, doing stuff with those, I'm gonna move it here. So say you're doing stuff with those, this goes here, this goes here. If these both can be change, if they're not continuous changes, it'll update whenever A or B changes. But if you do something say you use the T node, the T node is changing continuously, so it doesn't matter if this one changes frequently or not. This will need to change every frame because you put something continuous in there. It's a similar thing if you put smooth lerp. So you put smooth lerp in here, and then you put A. The smooth lerp, it can be changing continuously. It's kind of hard to track when the output will be changing or not. It's gonna force this to update every frame because this is sort of a continuous behavior. So it's it depends what your setup is. If you have setup that doesn't change continuously, it should only update when something actually changes. But if you have something that forces it to be continuous, then it's gonna be every frame. I would say if there are rumors and people somehow they notice that stuff change, the driver changes every frame when it shouldn't, they should make a bug report, see if they can replicate it, because it's one thing for it to be a rumor, but question is there anything solid behind the rumor, because a lot of times there isn't, there might not be. It's just people kind of speculating about things, which makes things a little bit frustrating because it's, we don't know, is there a bug or is it just people assuming things, because we've seen kind of both happen. And until somebody makes a solid report and it's okay, I have this setup is has nothing continuous in it, this shouldn't be changing every frame, but I've noticed it change, it updates every frame, then it's something actionable. We can look at it and we can be, okay, there's a bug happening here. But when it's just a rumor, there's nothing to really work with, which means we can't really do much about it, and might not even be true, and so it's if you hear that, ask for sources, ask for people to do you have any sort of solid data to that this is actually happening or not. Genuine case asking, would would bypassing the license be something that would get moderation involved? Almost definitely. Like there would be like if there is a license that says you can use it certain way or not, if you were like bypassing that would be some kind of violation. We don't have any specifics, how that would be dealt with because like this is not a current priority, but yeah, we'd probably like not really allow you to do that because we cannot allow you to kind of break the license. Next questions from Grand UK. Can the session browser be changed to have the name of the session rather than word name? Or maybe toggle for this. It can be hard to find sessions by session name that use published words unmodified. We're probably gonna rework the words UI like to use the data feed, so we'll probably do a bunch of changes. I don't know if we'll be making changes to the current one. You can always like make a GitHub issue like about it. Next questions from Grand UK. Will audio be tested under Proton to ensure basic audio features will work? You'll probably like run it like
Hello.
Oh, well, yeah, you run Cyber runs on Linux, so like, and there's gonna be
Yes.
pre-release too, so feel free to test it as well. I'll probably like run it on my Steam Deck as well.
Yes.
But in short, yeah. Next questions from BD underscore. Is there a built-in way to actually confirm when Perflex driver is being updated? I don't think there's like I don't know if we do have a tooling for it. Like it could like I wonder if like if you have ever noticed like when something changes in data model.
I mean, we do have like a fire on change node.
Yeah, but it's gonna
know if
filter
that is
actual same
actually-
value changes.
Yeah, I don't know if I can't think of a mechanism we have either to know whether something is being like updated or
But
if something is also like continuously changing.
Yeah.
Or
but it's actually a thing is like if there's not a mechanism, how are people saying that is happening? Because like did they make their own tools? Because like if somebody's saying that it is changing continually, how do they find out? Because if there's not a tooling, like did they build their own that kind of tracks it? And if they did, they can share that. It's a lot of those things. And if there's like if they don't have the tooling and they're just assuming, then it's dead. They're like assuming that's what's happening, and that doesn't really put much weight in that claim. So it's kind of like the thing is like if somebody's making the claim that is updating continually, the burden to prove that is on that person. Like that is actually happening. So it's a question: how did you find out? What tooling did you use? Next questions from Nitra. Are you actually certain that splitting will improve performance? Is there any worry that you implement everything and then find it actually runs worse? So I'm just... You can never be 100% certain of anything, but we do have pretty strong confidence that it'll significantly improve things. And the reason for that is we actually, as part of the big performance update, we actually switched the headless to .NET 9, well, there was .NET 8 at the time. We switched it first because headless is essentially, is the same code base, is literally all the same code, minus maybe like little bits, but it's like 99.9% the same code, same engine, and it didn't require that much work to move that one to .NET 8. So we did that, and then we looked, and the reason we did that is we wanted to see how much of a difference does that runtime switch make. And what we found is it actually is pretty big. Like it literally runs several times faster. We had community host sessions on the same hardware. Like for example, there's the Grand Oasis karaoke session that runs every Monday, and before with mono, the headless, it would struggle with 25 people. It would be kind of running really bad. Then they run it with the .NET 8, and the world got 44 people. And I even asked about it. Like Foxbox told me, like they don't use any culling like on the headless. The headless is computing everybody's IK. It's computing them bonds. It's computing everything. They cannot keep that. Um, and it still stayed at 60 FPS with 44 people. Where previously it would be struggling with 25 people. So there's a number of tests that Cyro and like number of people in the community have run, like where like it would consistently give the same result, like systems just run several times faster. Like recently I even had like somebody show me they made an item that profiles, spawning of items, and if you spawn it on the normal client, it would take like something like 3-4 seconds. If you spawn the same item on headless, it would take like half a second. So again, several times faster. So
Yeah.
I'm like, based on that, like I'm very confident this will like improve things. If when we did the upgrade to headless, if we didn't see that, I wouldn't be that confident. Like we might have like been like, okay, let's maybe change the plan. Let's maybe like take a different approach. But the fact that like switching the headless provided such a huge performance boost is like why we're investing all this time and energy into this. And it was done on purpose. It was done so we, actually can gather some data how much faster it runs. Even before the switch itself, like I've done like a lot of kind of like micro benchmarks on different parts of the code, comparing between different runtimes. And again, seen similar thing. It literally ran several times faster for most of the code. So I think it's very unlikely that it would actually run worse. Like I think it's gonna like run like way better. And again, like we can never know anything with 100% certainty. Maybe there's gonna be a really weird thing that happens, and it's gonna make it like run slower for some reason. But I think like the chance of that is like very low.
Yeah. And like just as a cherry on top, and even before Froox like reworked some of the particle system to use like C#'s more native like parallelization library, um, I tested the new particle system with some friends on like a big like mesh collider map, like typical big giant landscape. Whole thing's a mesh collider. We tested I think 4,500 particles with and without collisions. So without collisions, the particle system, the particles were all flying about whatever at like maybe 2.5-ish milliseconds per frame on like the graphical client, which would be something like I don't know how high of FPS that would be. How do I calculate FPS from milliseconds? Is it one? Is it
1
times
over.
1,000 or something? Okay, 1 over.
Well, it's gonna give you seconds, so we need to multiply by thousands.
Okay. Well, 2.5 milliseconds or so per frame on the graphical client, and 230 microseconds per frame on the server, because the server simulates the particle system. Then we turned on collisions, and the server jumps up to about 7.3, 7.5-ish milliseconds or so, with the particles all like performing ratecasts and doing their collision thing. And then the graphical client jumps up to 80 milliseconds per frame with collisions on, because it's doing the raycast, which queries Beppu, which runs a lot slower in our runtime. So
there's usually like
that alone is
like
pretty
10
good.
times faster.
Yeah, like 10 to 12 times faster on average in that scenario.
Yeah.
I want to do more tests just because like Froox has improved the parallelization of it a little bit. But like that's already like if that alone is like wow, that's a lot.
And if you need it even more, there's also great because like every like some of this was with .NET 8 and now there's .NET 9, and there's like the performance difference between Mono and .NET, like .NET 8 for example, that's like drastic. That's like at least an order of magnitude. But they also keep making improvements with every .NET version. And let me just pull this graph. So a while back when .NET 9 released, our cloud infrastructure, it actually already uses the modern.NET. And I wonder if you can tell where we switched to server code from .NET 8 to .NET 9. And literally this is the CPU usage, same workload, it literally just like swapped the server to use the new one. The CPU usage visibly dropped just by changing the .NET 8 to .NET 9 in the code base. Like, it's just free performance. So they keep making drastic like improvements, and like with every like release, like we kind of expect to get even more out of it. And that's even like with the same code base. The other part is like once we upgrade, we can actually switch to more modern version of Beppo, which has even more optimizations. It utilizes a lot of features of like the modern .NET that our version is not able to utilize. We will be able to do that for our own code. We'll be able to like utilize a lot of the new performance features that just don't exist in the old like mono.NET framework, which is gonna give even more performance boost. So in short, like I'm very confident it's gonna help performance like dramatically. Like if I didn't have this level of confidence, like wouldn't be putting this much effort into like making that happen. Next question is from Alex2PI. Froox, how do you feel? You sound a little sick or have a cold. Yeah, I'm a little bit I don't think I'm sick, but like I'm like a little bit bleh. Part of it is like I ate way too much for the potato salad, so I'm like bleh. That's kind of one of the reasons why I'm just like lounging and just being like I'm kind of I'm kind of tired. But hopefully still answering questions okay. Nitra is asking, I was mainly thinking about the Unity Froox engine IPC connection, not necessarily the origin performance. Has the IPC stuff been tested at all? I have done some things with IPC, it was actually quite slow, but I may have just coded it badly. So we've done a bunch of like research into IPC methods. The one that we're gonna be using heavily is actually called shared memory. And that one, it's like what essentially happens is like you can have like each process, it has its own sort of chunk of memory. So like maybe say like you have a process, say this is like Froox engine, and then we have like Unity. I'm just gonna make like weird cube or something. I can't draw. Pretend this is Unity, and this is Gloopy. Poorly drawn Gloopy. So each process has its own memory, and this maps, to physical memory. So maybe like, this chunk will map here, this chunk will map, over there. I'm kind of not drawing it super well. This one has chunk here, that maps here. What shared memory does, it can take a region in the process memory, say like this one, that will map to a memory, like physical memory region, and then the other application maps that same memory region to this, so literally two processes share the same chunk of memory. Now we're kind of drawing it a bit, there we go. And this mechanism is extremely fast. There's like, other mechanisms where actually, you have the processes, like, you have the operating system, you have like your OS, and this one tells the operating system, tell this process that, and it goes there and it sends it that. This is usually what takes more time because like it has to switch to the operating system, do a thing, and so on. But also like even this can be workable. Oftentimes like when you design like IPC mechanisms, it's a little bit similar also like like when you use pinvoke, like in C# for example, to call native library, that switch from one process or like one runtime to another can be expensive. Usually what you do to make that efficient is like you reduce how much you switch. So for example, with C#, if you use like pinvoke, you will want to model your API, so you call as infrequently as possible, but with each call you give it a big chunk of data to work with. That way like you reduce that cost. So if you were like using this messaging algorithm, we would probably be like, okay, prepare a big chunk of like update, that's pretty much everything it needs to do, for whatever the frame is being rendered, and it just sends it over. That cost of switching is then minimized to the point like where it's it's just gonna be like negligible compared to the amount of time that's being saved. But with the shared memory, it's even better because the two processes can literally share same chunk of memory for both of them. Like there's like pretty much a zero copying that needs to happen. So Resonite will essentially fill a buffer with stuff that needs to be rendered, and then the unit is just gonna read that as if it was their own memory, like which means zero copies. It's extremely fast. There's even like libraries for it. Like it's just like it's pretty much as if each process was accessing its own chunk of memory. There's like very much like no overhead for it, and there might be some small messages that get sent over just telling it, okay, this is ready, render this. It might also happen over the share memory. There's like some mechanisms for that, like not fully decided on that one yet, but this is gonna be how bulk of data is gonna be communicated. A lot of those systems are also being designed to work around this. So for example, with photon dust, the way photon dust works, when it finishes the simulation, it has like all of its own buffers, but the final result, the data that is necessary to render the particle system, is a continuous data buffer. So it can literally put it into this and just tell Unity there's photon dust buffer at this location within the share block, and it's just gonna interpret it and render it. So those systems are designed to work with this IPC mechanism, specifically with shared memory, and so will the integration. As part of the splitting, I will be redesigning how Froox engine communicates to Unity, so it happens essentially prepares a big buffer of stuff that Unity needs to do, and just gonna tell it it's ready. Unity is gonna go on town on it to do the rendering, and then Froox engine can do its own stuff. So I'm pretty confident that stuff is gonna run pretty fast. And I've kind of done a bunch of kind of research into it. If you look at it as well, there's there's also precedent for this. There's a number of projects that do use IPC mechanisms that run really fast. For example, your web browser, because web browsers they use multi-process architecture, and they do quite complex stuff. Oftentimes, with web browser, you have you have processes that handle the web pages themselves, and then they need to communicate a lot of the stuff, for example, stuff that renders. Oftentimes the WebGL, is the process that interacts with the GPU, is actually a separate process from the one that's handling the page, so it's communicating over IPC. A lot of the kind of complex stuff it does, if you design it well, it can run really fast. The other example is also VR, because when this is kind of being rendered, if you use Steam VR, for example, the results, they're being sent over IPC, to the compositor, which is a separate process. So, the mechanisms, the IPC mechanisms, they are fast enough. If you use the right ones, and if you use them the right way, they are fast enough to even run VR stuff, and to do a lot of high performance stuff on the browser, even stuff 3D WebGL and so on. So in short, I don't expect it to be an issue, especially with the shared memory mechanism and with building everything to take advantage of this. When I started, investigating this, I did a whole bunch of research. I was like, what IPC mechanisms are there? How do they perform? What would be the best ones to use? And I decided on the shared memory quite early on, and then designed photon dust and other stuff around it. The audio engine is actually doesn't even need to be, because that's not gonna be sending anything to Unity at all, which is also a way to make it faster. So for audio, we don't need to worry about IPC at all, because it's not gonna touch Unity. So I do hope this kind of answers that question.
Yeah, I think for even some smaller bits of data too, you could take advantage of the atomicity of certain operations.
Yeah. Oftentimes, like with these things, is it's like how you use the APIs. It's like, um, there can be overhead with some, and if there's like an overhead, you kind of find like a way to work around it, and there definitely are ways to make that fast. And based on the research like I've done, like I'm confident this is gonna like run like much faster. Next question, also checking time. We got 25 minutes left. Next question is from Ozzy. I know this probable implementation details, but you mentioned before possibly restarting Unity with crashes with splitting. Unity handles the SteamVR rendering communication from rendering. Would SteamVR complain massively on losing connection to the application? I mean, it will, yeah. Like if the render crashes, from SteamVR's perspective, the application's gone, but we just started again, and it connects to SteamVR again. So it's actually a part like where the main process is not the one that's gonna be interacting with. It's not gonna be interacting with Froox engine directly. It's gonna be going through Unity, the renderer, which is interfacing with that one. So from SteamVR's perspective, the application shuts down and starts again, but that doesn't matter for the process, for the main process. Next question is also from Ozzy. Extra question on top of that. Could there be a way after multiprocess to be able to switch from desktop to VR without starting up in SteamVR first? I mean, technically that doesn't need multiprocess architecture. Like we could just implement that. We could initialize SteamVR later. There's a few changes that do need to happen because like right now when Froox engine starts, it essentially the engine is either initialized with desktop only, with screen only, or with using VR. But one of the approaches is to kind of unify that, so like it just doesn't care. It's always gonna initialize everything in a way that assumes you can be using either, and then we just spin up Steam VR like when needed. So yeah, like it technically can be done without it. Yeah, like pretty much like it needs that done, so like the engine isn't making assumption that you're gonna be using on the screen. And like the multiprocess doesn't really. Maybe it helps a little bit in the fact that like if we don't implement it on the render, where it can be initialized after the fact, which I don't really see super much reason that we wouldn't be able to do that. But in case we were not able to do that, we could just restart it, but I don't think that's necessary. I think we can just, implement this. Marty SH is asking, does Chroma have his own office hours, or is he part of Art office hours? I haven't seen him on the Art office hours, and I have a lot of UX questions. I don't think he does. Actually, it's hard to happen to know. I don't know if he runs like his own right now.
I don't know. Let me check like the events.
It might be worth like asking at the Art office hours anyways, because they do like work with Chroma as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't kept up with that particular thing.
I will still go and ask over there, and see like what can I get. Like they might come because they work with Chroma a lot more, since it's kind of like more intertwined. I know like Chroma like does run something sometimes, like it does like stream in Discord and such, so it might be, I don't know if he like accepts questions during those, but it might be worth checking them out. But you can also ask, you can ask UX questions over here as well. You can ask them on the art team. So, because like there's, a lot of people have like on the team have like a lot of like shared kind of responsibilities. With that, like we have about 22 minutes left, and there's no more questions right now. So if you've still got more questions, feel free to ask. Actually, dude, we didn't get Schnoppet today. I just realized.
We did not get a Schnoppet today.
Yeah, there's no Schnoppet. What happened? This is grand sick. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
We got Schnoppet from Grand, but now it's too late. It's too late for a Schnoppet. Unless, do you have one?
Do I have one? Well, I mean, I guess I only have a kind of mild one that like a question earlier made me think about. was the myth that like the IK is this like big heavy thing, and that uh like just that the myth is the IK is heavy when it's really not.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of thing in general. There's like a lot of like, actually, yeah, I'm actually gonna turn this into bigger snippets. I feel
Okay.
like this is a thing in general. Is like a lot of people will just take things on face value. They will like, and that's kind of like how a lot of the rumors spread is because somebody says something, and it was even worse. It's a little bit like um, what's the name of it? Like the Chinese whispers, like where you tell one person one thing and you tell them to pass it on, and they tell it to other person, but
Game
they
of
morph it a bit.
a game of
Yeah,
telephone.
a game of telephone. Um, and like it just keeps morphing and morphing, and we kind of noticed that happening with some of the like a lot of the things in the community where it just kind of things propagate, and people just take it at face value, but it also mutates over time. And oh, I know,
Oh, you
sorry,
stop it.
I schnoppeted, like literally schnoppeted, and I need to reposition. There we go. Um, oh boy, there we go. So a lot of people just kind of like repeat things and not verify. And some of my background, like is actually like in science. And one of the things like you do a lot is like we have to figure out you have to figure out like what your primary sources of information are. Actually, not just science, but I was also working as an editor for a magazine, and a lot of the times like we have to do research, like reporting on things, and you do have to find your primary sources, like because using secondary sources or tertiary sources, like more it can be unreliable. The information gets morphed. So a lot of my thinking, like whenever I hear somebody say something, I'm like, where is that coming from? What is like, where did you get that piece of information? Are you the source of information? Did you do a test? Did you do something? Did you get the information from somebody else? Did they do the test? Like where is that piece of information? Where is that that statement coming from? And it's also like very important to do as an engineer, because if you want to solve problems, you need to understand them. Unless some people solve problems like they just kind of poke things and until it starts working, and they do, and you have like the situation, you fix it, but you don't know why it's fixed. Like I really hate like when it happens, like whenever there's a bug and it starts working and I don't know why, I will usually keep at it, because I'm like, I need to understand like what is happening. I need to understand why it was not working before. I need to understand why it works now. Because if I don't understand it, I don't know if it's actually fixed or if it's just like, part of the behavior. Because usually if I don't understand it and it seems like it fixed itself, it has a tendency to just pop up later, or maybe be just hiding some more devious bug. So I will be like really doing like, kind of drilling down into like, trying to get to the core of the thing, try to find what is the source of this. And you also do stuff like, you apply Occam's razor, which is like, you try to remove everything that doesn't matter, that doesn't like make a difference for whatever the statement is. So if there's like, for example, bug report and the person mentions, oh, this, I'm like, does this thing matter? Does this thing matter? Because the more variables there are, the harder the problem is to solve. And anything you can eliminate, it's like, imagine like, imagine a bug is like, composed from lots of like little pieces, and there's like, stuff here, and there's 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 stuff here and here, and there's like a lot of things. And maybe like this is the like, and you don't know where the bug is. So what you want to do is like, does this make a difference for the bug? Nope. Does this make a difference for the bug? Nope. Does this make a difference for the bug? No. Does this make a difference for the bug? No. Does this make a difference for the bug? No. Does this make a difference? No. Okay, this is my root, and does this make a difference? Yes. This is my core issue, and this is much easier to deal with, than dealing with this. And I kind of like, wish people would adopt more of this kind of thinking. Not even for Resonite, even more general, because I do see that kind of happen, like where people will just kind of spread things, without like, you know, having anything basis. Like, you know, it's like somebody said something, so like, you know, not saying it, and it's like, and I was kind of thinking like, you know, is where, like, the way I kind of think about things, and it's also like similar how you approach things in science, is, you know, what is the strength of evidence you have for something, and how many ways can it be verified independently. Like, you know, in science, like, you have, you know, the peer review process. Whenever you publish something, you know, you publish a study, you start with some kind of hypothesis, and what you actually do, or what you should do, you don't actually go out trying to prove your hypothesis. You go out to try to disprove it. You try to, you know, you try to find anything that could make it that your hypothesis is wrong. And if you can do that, like, you know, if you can throw a lot of things at your hypothesis and it still stands after you genuinely trying to disprove it, that gives you confidence that your hypothesis is true. It doesn't give it 100% certainty, but it gives you more confidence in it. And, you know, maybe you publish a study, you're like, we did this, we tried this. This is, you know, and because we tried to disprove it this many ways, it's still standing. This gives us good confidence. But you publish it, and then, like, you know, other people can look at it, and, you know, you have the peer review process. Maybe they try to poke holes in it, and if it can withstand even that makes it even stronger. And now if other people make, you know, their own studies, and they try to, like, you know, try to approach it from different angles, you know, from different things, and they arrive at the same results. The hypothesis is still standing after those, you know, attempts to, like, you know, essentially disprove it. That gives you even more confidence that it is a good model for what is happening. Because if you go out to, like, you know, prove what you're trying, like, you know, if you try to prove your hypothesis true, you end up like suffering from like a number of like kind of biases. Like, you're gonna look for data that like fits the hypothesis, and you might kind of like ignore or even notice, like, you know, data that doesn't, and that can lead you to false results. Which is why it's so important, you know, to approach it from the other angle. You try to, like, you know, bring it down. Like, you know, you try to like disprove it, and if it can withstand that, then it's good. Then it's a good model. And it's same, like, you know, with any kind of like piece of information. It's like if somebody says something, that to me, like, unless they have a source, like, that to me doesn't have much of a value. You know, the like, you know, it doesn't have much weight. But now if they're like, okay, I did this test, you know, it showed this, okay, now this put like a lot more weight to it. But still, like, I'm gonna be like, okay, did you do this? Did you do that? Could you be mistaking this and that? And if it withstands that, then I'll be, okay, this has even more weight, and I'll take it even more seriously. So it's kind of like, you know, like, and with most things, you'll never be 100% sure. Like, there might be, you know, specific edge cases where it's not quite correct, but the more you kind of like try to, like, you know, poke holes, and the more you try to like scrutinize it, and it still, you know, keeps standing after that, the more confidence you can have that, like, you know, it has some solid basis in reality. But if it's a rumor, it's just somebody said it, and it's like, how, like, you know, how can you tell? Like, how can you figure out, is this something that is based in the reality, or is this, you know, a game of telephone? Like, somebody said something, and then somebody repeated it, and somebody else repeated it, and like, you literally get like a thing that kind of, it's almost like a butterfly effect, you know. Somebody can say something small, and somebody repeats it, and then it just kind of keeps spreading, and literally you have like a whole, you know, rumor just kind of, that literally started from something small, and it just kind of snowballed because nobody along that chain tried to, like, you know, dig into it and try to find what is the source of this. Is this really true? Is this really happening? It's actually something that happened, like, you know, recently, and I think I actually talked about this one. It happened when we made like some other changes for the join invites and made the ask to join button appear, and somebody was like, oh, it leaks invisible status. And people started panicking. They were like, like, oh, like it's horrible, like, the invisible status is getting leaked. And I was like, look at it, was like, does it really? Like, and so my first thing to test was, okay, because if you look at it, leaking invisible status means you can tell a difference between the user who genuinely goes offline and who goes invisible. What it means is that if it was true, then user going invisible would keep that button, and the user going offline would not keep that button, meaning you can tell difference. That would mean invisible status is leaked. So what I did, I did 2 tests. One, I started Resonite on two computers, 2 different accounts. Both were online, and then with one of them I went invisible, looked at the other. Okay, the ask to join button is still there. But the other important part is like I would. The other important part, I would shut both of them down, start a clean one, both online, and then I would actually shut the other one down so it goes offline and truly goes offline, and looked. Oh, and the button was still there, which means it has nothing to do with leaking invisible status. And that's an easy test that like anybody could have done before reporting it, before saying things. But people they saw a thing and they jumped to a conclusion without verifying that conclusion is actually valid, and and this potentially how a rumor could have started, that this thing leaks invisible status, even though it's demonstrably not true. And I hope that more people can kind of adopt this kind of mindset of if you see something or if you think something, try to disprove it first. Try to think, how could I check if this is if this statement or this thing what this hypothesis, because this is pretty much a hypothesis, is that the status the button leaks invisible status. How do I disprove it? Because it's very easy to disprove it. It's literally just go offline, see if the same thing happens. And the test, it took me it took me 5 minutes to do, maybe even less, and immediately showed there's no basis in truth for that claim. There's still a bug that happens, but it's not what people were claiming to be, and it's there was no reason for the panicking. So please, if you're working with things, try to think about where you're getting your information from. What is the basis for this, and how do you disprove it, and base your confidence in that statement on how solid the evidence is, and try to find what are the primary sources. Where is this information originating from? Is it originating from a statement somebody said without any verification, or is it originating from some actual test that you can replicate as well? Because in science, there's also another thing is, if you publish a study, the purpose of that is so other people can actually replicate what you did and see if they arrive to the same conclusion. And if multiple people do that, multiple people repeat the experiment and they end up with the same conclusion, that gives you even more strength, in that piece of information, in that hypothesis. I've kind of rambled a bit of a bunch of questions, but yeah, that's my snippet.
Well, we have 8 minutes to answer these next 2
We have
questions.
8 minutes for these.
I think it's actually 1 question that they put in 2 messages.
No, there's a few. So the next one is from Bitcrack IGN. I've had a discussion about Resonite's performance in comparing to VRChat. Personally, I think it's not fair to compare Resonite to VRChat because they're totally different, but despite Resonite's dynamic nature, I think it has some advantages over VRChat, or might have later on, like utilizing it at night, new render, and more. Continuing. Oh, yeah, that's 2 questions. Gonna put the... Oops, and I pulled out the other one by accident. The There we go. Continuing, but I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you believe that Resonite can ever come close to VR chess performance when compared to similar gameplay? I mentioned this hanging out world in a static world. Yeah, I think it definitely can. Like, I think with .NET 9, like, that's gonna be a big improvement. We'll see how it kind of runs with that. There's still a lot of other performance optimizations we can do. So there's like two things. So like one, in some aspects, I do feel it's a little bit unfair because Resonite's doing a lot of things that the Architect isn't, like with the editing and so on. So it's like you're comparing performance that includes doing things that the data platform doesn't, but also like even in those cases to the end user it might not matter. Like they will not care why it might run slower. It just runs slower, and that's the main thing. But I do think we like it's not even about kind of coming close. I do think like we can run like way better, especially with the .NET 9 and with some of the future performance updates, because we'll be like with the .NET 9 we'll be able to use much more modern technologies, and we already have like a lot of the systems designed for very kind of high performance like usage, and there's other things we want to do to be able to better scale. We also have systems like, for example, the asset variant system, where we can sort of generate lots of variants for the assets on the fly, even for existing content, and be able to kind of optimize, content for different kind of devices, which on itself can help quite a bit. So I am pretty confident like it's doable. I don't really have like any side-by-side benchmarks, so like it's kind of hard to say, but like I don't see a reason like why it wouldn't be able to like run like faster, especially if you like have a same scenario when people just kind of hanging out. We can kind of optimize those scenarios. That's like another part with performance is like it depends what you're doing, because you want to be comparing like very similar scenarios, because if you're doing very different things, like you're doing heavy editing, say like you use a node that's like constantly scanning the hierarchy, that's not going to run well, even like with a lot of optimizations. So the context of it kind of matters. But if you have like well optimized content on both sides, if you have like all of the optimizations, I do think it can run same or even like better, like thanks to the modern technologies. Next question is Garin VR is asking, probably not the best place to mention this, but I've heard rumors of varying severity spread about Resonite on a couple of VR platforms. How do you plan to deal with this, and what is the plan of action towards dealing with issues or accusations if they're actually true? So I'm pretty much like this. Like, the best thing we can do is provide more sources of official information, but I don't think it's a problem, you can really 100% fix, because people will spread rumors, and a lot of people will not care, about like whether they're true or not. And it's like something like, that is hard to change. But like what we can do is like, by providing these materials, talking about the issues, we provide more sources of official information. And I've already heard like, from a number of people where if they're talking with somebody, like before they would like, be like, oh, I heard Froox saying this and that, or I heard like this team member saying this and that. And it's like kind of hard, but now they can like just be like, there's a Resonance video, there's, they have something solid to point them to. They have like a primary source of information, and that can help, make people more informed. And as part of the reasons like why I'm doing this, like why we're doing this office hours, is to help prevent like rumors by talking about things and giving you like as accurate information as we can. Usually what I like, like if there's a rumor, you can bring it up. It's kind of hard to talk about it in general because I don't know like which ones you're talking about. But if you bring one, we can talk about it. We can see like where they might be coming from, and like whatever the official thing is, or whatever like if we see something that's like incorrect about it. So yeah, I would say like bring more specific things, but like overall, these office hours, like they're a good way to kind of combat like some of the rumors. Next question is from Alex Taco Anton. Questions from CFK. We also might not have enough time to like answer all of these questions, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes.
Will there be detailed node information on node selection screen? Probably that the interface is gonna be redesigned. Next question. Why do we get like these like big questions at the end? Alex
my
content
goodness.
feature, will there be integration of third-party modifications from users that improve our application process with additional installations? Probably not. Alex Anton, the roadmap. On which stage you will say Resonite is released? We literally made a video on it last week. Check out the YouTube channel. And Alex Anton, word preloading. I don't know what that means exactly. Marty SH, does Resonite UI design have a name? We call it the Radiant UI. Aegis Wolf, one of the reasons we're using older version of Unity compared to other places. Do Unity not doing anything much with real-time rendering as much anymore? Not really, it's a complicated issue. I don't have time to answer it in detail, but like the newer versions of Unity are missing some of the crucial features that we need. Plus, it takes a lot of time to kind of like switch to those, and we want to switch to a completely different engine. So like it's like, where do we invest our time? And I think like we're just gonna.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions that like I recommend check out our YouTube channel. A lot of these questions and if you have like feature requests, make them on our GitHub. Yeah, literally several of the things you posted, like there's already GitHub issues for those. I recommend checking that out. Check the videos on YouTube. We're gonna have to kind of cut it here because like this is the last 2 seconds. So thank you very much for watching. I hope like you enjoyed this episode of Resonance. I hope like you enjoyed all the questions, and all the answers. Thank you everyone for supporting Resonite. Also big thing, thank everyone for supporting us Patreon and Stripe, and especially to those who switched to Stripe. This is already making big changes in our financial numbers. We're actually now, instead of being in a deficit, we're actually now cash positive, cash flow positive. Bob did a whole he had nice graphs and Friday's recap stream. So check the recording of that if you're interested, and if you're supporting us Patreon, consider switching to Stripe, even at the same tier, because we get about 10% more of that money, which means we can kind of invest it into making Resonite better. But whether you support us financially or just being part of the community, building cool stuff, hanging out, just being part of the place, thank you very much. There's probably not going to be Resonance next week because I'll be traveling, and after that I'm not certain either, so it's possible next 2 might not happen. I'll have to figure stuff out, but the next week very likely not. Yeah, the next week is definitely not gonna happen, so we'll make posts whenever the next one happens. So whenever that is, we'll see you with the next one. And let me see if there's anybody to raid. We like to raid people who are streaming Resonite. It might be only Creator Jam. Yeah, honestly, Creator Jam.
If you guys have questions you want to ask, just when the stream's not happening, be sure to check for the office hours thread that Froox makes.
Yes. I might not make one now because I don't know when the next one's gonna be. So I do recommend bringing those bigger questions earlier, because we always at the end we have a whole bunch of big questions that we now don't have the time to answer. So we should be ready to raid Creator Jam. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you with the next one whenever the next one happens. Bye bye.
Bye bye.